Imagine you hear a scream coming from another room and it's from your child. As you run, you are going to the deepest, darkest place in your mind. You're thinking about they're badly hurt, somebody's in there terrorizing them, they're watching something scary, but when you get in there, they're alone, there's nothing on TV, and they're not hurt. Millions of parents hear this from their child, if not once, but several times a day. And what the children are facing is called sensory processing disorder. If you walk into a classroom full of 20 children, at least one of those children is suffering from sensory processing disorder. This fact comes from the Sensory Processing Foundation. Their website is spdfoundation.net, and they are the world leader in education, research, and global awareness for sensory processing disorder. Many of these children that are suffering in this classroom may or may not know that they're suffering from sensory processing disorder because it's not a diagnosable condition. My son Aiden, who you all know, suffers from sensory processing disorder, and we've been on a 3.5 to 4 year journey trying to figure out how to control it rather than it to control him. I want to introduce you to sensory processing disorder today and show you the need for donations to Sensory Processing Disorder Foundation and explain what those donations are going to go towards and how to do it. Let's start with what sensory processing disorder is. There's an amazing book out called The Out of Sync Child. It's written by Carol Stock-Kranowitz. She has an MA in education and in human development. She published it in 1998, and she defines sensory processing disorder as the inability to use information received through the senses in order to function smoothly in daily life. So to put it a little bit more easier to understand, imagine yourself driving down a road and you see a speed bump coming. A typical driver would slow their speed down and regulate their car so they were to get over the speed bump with minimal impact. Someone with sensory processing disorder would go one of three ways. They would either speed up to get over the speed bump, slow significantly down and need much help to get over the speed bump, or completely swerve around it. While I was doing my research for this in July for this speech, I found a statement. It was written on University of California, San Francisco's website, ucsf.edu. The article was entitled, "Breakthrough Study Reveals Biological Basis for Sensory Processing Disorders in Kids." It was written by Juliana Bunham, and she is the Senior Public Information Representative. This statement summed up the need for donations to Sensory Processing Disorder Foundations for me. It made so much impact that I'd like for me to read it to you. She says, I quote, "Sensory processing disorders are more prevalent in children than autism and as common as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Yet the condition receives far less attention, partly because it's never been recognized as a distinct disease." The evidence backing this statement comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics, who advises all pediatricians to treat SPD, sensory processing disorder, as a symptom of something larger, like autism, Asperger's, ADHD, or anxiety, not to treat it as its own distinct disease. This also corroborates by the latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5. It is also not included in that. In that same article written by Juliana Bunham, she also claims that 5 to 16% of school-age children are affected by SPD. And educators nowadays are legally obligated to have inclusive classrooms. That means they have to have typical developing, special needs, and gifted children all in the same class. Now, someone like Aiden, who's not able to be diagnosed, would be labeled typical developing. That educator would then see the symptoms of something larger, like autism or Asperger's, and start the process to get him identified and diagnosed with one of those larger disorders. And they would also be treated in the classroom as such. So someone with autism or Asperger's would need more one-on-one, attention, more direction, where Aiden and his type of sensory processing disorder, all he would need is a big hug, or maybe to go around and pick up his peers' markers or his papers and put them on the teacher's desk. And then he would be fine to focus for another 15 or 20 minutes. So a lot of these children that are being identified are being identified with the wrong disorder, and that's where the statistic comes from. According to Sensory Processing Disorders Foundation's research, they have found while sensory processing disorder can manifest itself with other disorders, it also can be stand on its own. There's enough evidence to show this. So now that you know what SPD is and why there's a need for donations, I would like to show you how it can better be reached. There are many universities like University of California, San Francisco that are doing their own research and making great strides to get SPD in the next DSM. However, I feel there is one organization that can further this cause, and that would be Sensory Processing Disorders Foundation. They have a vision for the future to identify and treat each child who has SPD by the age of 6. And as a mom and a future educator, that speaks volumes to me, because you want to be able to have that identified and treated before they get into kindergarten, because then they have a strong foundation to build their academic and life skills on. Let me tell you what else your donations can go towards. If you donate to Sensory Processing Disorder Foundation, they also do education, so they educate parents, they educate administrators, they educate educators, they bring awareness, but one thing I find as a parent is they also have advocacy. And for someone who sometimes has nowhere to go and there's not enough support or knowledge or awareness of this, to have some place to go and say, what do I do now? Where am I supposed to go? And have them to be able to help is priceless. So they would not only go towards research, they would also go to help current parents that are struggling with this, and adults as well. By now I'm sure you see the need for the donations and what else it would go towards. I also want to tell you how to do it. You can go directly to Sensory Processing Disorders Foundation's website. It's spdfoundation.net, and you can make a one-time donation, or you can make monthly donations. You can also get their phone number, and you can get their email, and you can get their mailing address, and you can do any one of those. But also they have an annual membership where you can sign up to be an annual donor, and you also get benefits like webinars, education materials, and discounts to a certain website to use for tools that would help sensory processing disorder children. But one of the most important things I feel for myself is time. Just learning and educating yourself on what the signs are for sensory processing disorder, and to be able to help maybe a struggling mom or dad who does not know what is wrong with their children, to be able to say, hey, did you ever think of this? And there's a couple of this, and be able to give facts and to point them in a direction is priceless, because I have been there and I know. So now that I've introduced you to sensory processing disorder, where you should go to donate and the need to donate, I am urging you to go to Sensory Processing Disorders Foundation and make a donation, because there are millions of kids that wake up every morning struggling with this, and they go to bed struggling with this, and sometimes they can't even sleep because of this. And that screaming scenario that I talked about earlier, if SPD was a diagnosable condition, it would happen far less, and with the right tools and training, the parents and the child would be able to regulate their systems much easier.